Welcome to Taking Stock with Lisa Brown. My special guests today are personal finance experts Barbara Bilello and Lisa Niera with our CI financial partner firm, Region Atlantic. These two women not only educate and advise their LGBTQ clients on critical financial planning strategies, they are part of the LGBTQ community personally. Lisa and Barbara have tremendous experiences to share, not only about money, but about navigating the stereotypes that can exist within the LGBTQ community. And I was recently catching up with Lisa and Barbara on issues that they're currently seeing in advance of Pride Month, and they're here today to share some important tips to protect you financially. Welcome, Lisa and Barbara.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having us today.
Thanks, Lisa. Good to be here.
Lisa, I want to start with you. You shared with me recently that family planning and estate planning issues are paramount to the LGBTQ community, especially in light of recent proposed legislation in this country. So let's talk a little bit about family planning and your perspectives, both professionally and personally.
Sure. Would love to dive into that. I think there's a lot of considerations when it pertains to those particular areas. And obviously, there's a lot going on right now in the political environment that has many of us in the LGBTQ community on edge. Barbara and I, we recognize that, we acknowledge that, and being part of the community ourselves, we feel it too. And we can talk a little bit more about that at the end. But let's dive into family planning. It's particularly top of mind for me as my wife and I are in the midst of doing just that. And building a family, growing a family, that's exciting for anyone embarking on that journey. But the reality is for LGBTQ couples, it's also joined with some financial burden to start. And some background, my wife and I, we've been together for 10 years and married for almost 2, and we want kids. And last summer, we began the process to grow our family. And Lisa, let me tell you, it is not cheap. Okay. And the reality too is more and more folks in the community want to have kids. When you look at the millennial generation, for example, over 70% are either parents or considering having kids. So this is really going to continue to be a very hot topic across the board. So let's talk money for a minute. And I won't bore our listeners with all the data, facts, and figures, but let's start with a few ways that you can build a family. First is adoption. And that includes foster care adoption, private adoption, domestic or international. And the cost can be, $40,000 plus, even more, especially if you're going international. By the way, know your state laws. There are 17 states today with no explicit protections against discrimination in adoption based on sexual orientation or gender identity. That's a whole other conversation around state laws. But that's the cost there for adoption. The second way is surrogacy. And when you think about surrogacy, there's 2 ways. Traditional surrogacy is when the birth mother carries a child who she's conceived from donor sperm. And then there's gestational surrogacy, and that's where a third person gives birth to a baby conceived outside of the womb from a donor egg and sperm through IVF, in vitro fertilization. So both of those options provide ways for an LGBTQ person to have biological children. What's the cost for that? That ranges between $90,000 to $130,000. Wow. I think the average today is 110. So again, not cheap. Then you have IUI or IVF. So what is that? IUI, that's the process where a donor sperm is inserted into the uterus. And that could run you a couple of $1,000s. And that also depends on how successful you are and how many rounds you have to go through. And IVF, right? That's the process of creating an embryo in the lab and transfer it to the carrier. That's $15,000 to $20,000 plus right there. What I did is I did reciprocal IVF. My wife, Mindy, and I, it was important for us to both have a level of a bond with the baby. So that entails me extracting my egg, going through the IVF process, and then transferring that to Mindy, who will be the birthing parent. So my biological child, but Mindy will birth the child. And we felt that was the way that we wanted to build a family together. That's going to cost you $20,000, $30,000 plus $1,000. And that's, again, how many rounds do you need to go through for you to be successful? So no matter which route you go, Lisa, it's expensive. And here's the issue. The issue is many insurers base coverage on what the Center for Disease Control and Prevention definition is for infertility. So when they'll step in and start to cover. And that definition states, and I'm quoting for our listeners who can't see me, is not being able to get pregnant, conceive after 1 year or longer of unprotected sex. So obviously, this is written for heterosexual couples because it's quite literally impossible for two women or two men to get pregnant from unprotected sex. So that's why, the cost really comes is a burden to us because we can't prove we are infertile the way in which a heterosexual couple can. And I remember fighting with my insurance company when I was going through this process, and also my HR. And all they could do was really repeat the policy to me and tell me why it was not covered. And in fact, they let me know that technically my wife is just considered a surrogate to me. And that's hurtful, right, to hear those type of things. But at the end of the day, they were basically saying they don't recognize how we want to build a family, and that we were not medically infertile. Rather, we were socially infertile, meaning by choice, right? So, what's the story here? You have to do some planning, right? If you're looking to build a family, I suggest talking to your HR department, talking to your insurance provider to understand first what is covered for me and what is my process. Barbara, I don't know if you have any insight there, but I think for LGBTQ couples who are going to embark on this journey, it's get informed, talk to your insurance companies, talk to the decision makers, and find out where you stand before you can start to think about budgeting and all that kind of good stuff. What are your thoughts, Barbara, on that?
I think those are wise words, Lisa, and certainly someone like you who speaks from this experience. Those words have meaning and lots of weight. And so, at the end of the day, when we sort of come back to the fact that we are financial planners, this is definitely a conversation that one could have with us in terms of the, sort of the details of all of it, what one can afford, how much one needs to save. So again, I appreciate you sharing all of the detail with the audience. And I think that, again, this is a great time for people to start having that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the name of the game here is kind of wrapped back to financial planning. Just like with any big expense, I mean, sometimes the cost of this is like a tuition, 1 year's of tuition, right? So when you're sending a child to college, you're probably doing some level of budgeting, saving, and planning, right? You have to take that same approach when you're building a family, especially if you're part of the LGBTQ community, right? Your costs start the moment you begin the process. Now, the other part of that too is what can you do? So it's being informed, it's financial planning, talk to an advisor to help you navigate these things. And then maybe talk to an advisor who is experienced and maybe has gone through this process as well, and can hold your hand through it. But also maybe being an advocate, right? If the insurance company or your employer, right, doesn't have the coverage, talk to decision makers, advocate. I know it can be difficult. I tried to do that with my own insurance and HR, and it's a process, but times are changing, and I hope for better days, and I hope for more of an inclusive policy where it's not written just for heterosexual couples, but it's written for everybody. I hope for that day to come, but squeaky wheels, right? We kind of have to raise our hands and make some waves. So that's a little bit about the family planning piece of it, and I think it's getting informed is incredibly important, and knowing what the costs are going to be and figuring out how you're going to fund that cost.
Lisa, it's really incredible as I think about your comment about this being the cost of a college education, yet the age at which individuals will be experiencing this cost might be a lot earlier in their career than they have the resources to really start saving for a college education. You don't have 18 years to save for family planning, like as a parent of a newborn you do for college. So, to me, one of the takeaways is to maybe even start planning for this before you meet your eventual partner. Because again, the time frame for saving is so short. And, as advisors, we look at the time frame of, is it a long-term goal? Is it a short-term goal? And therefore that dictates how you should invest that money or not invest that money. So another, great point for individuals to be thinking about in regards to family planning. And on that note, Lisa, congratulations on your recent marriage and certainly on starting your wonderful family. There's also, in addition to family planning, there's a lot of estate planning moves that someone needs to be thinking about when they're in a same-sex relationship. So, ladies, tell us a little bit about some of these estate planning moves that people need to be thinking about.
Sure, Lisa, I'd love to sort of do a high level on that. And then Lisa, Niera, if you want to pop in. I think if we can go back, Lisa Brown, to the fact that we're all wealth advisors and planners, when folks think about those roles, they think quickly about portfolio management and, asset management and the stock market. Today's financial advisor does so much more than that. And part of that, again, the main thrust of it is financial planning. So if we look at that as an umbrella, not only are we looking at your portfolio, the asset side of your balance sheet, we're also looking at your liabilities. And liabilities don't just mean debt. They also mean things like insurance coverage. Further to that point is estate planning. We are looking at the level of risk that you take, the level of exposure that you take, because whatever is going to impact your life, we need to know about so we can help you prepare for it. And so that said, when we think about what is at risk for people, having holes in your estate plan, again, we view as a risk or liability. And so making sure that we have thorough, sort of watertight estate planning documents in place, which Lisa Niera will go through with the audience. I think those are really, really important matters at hand that, certainly when folks are thinking of getting married, it's probably the last thing they think about is putting together wills and things like that. So bear in mind those things that, there's the romance of marriage, but there's also the practical side of it. And so, Lisa Niera and I can certainly help folks think about those things.
So let's talk a little bit about estate planning, and I'll start with some good news, right? After 2015, when same-sex couples were granted the constitutional right to marry, we were afforded many of the previously unattainable strategies and tax savings that come along with legal marriage. For example, I'm happy to be able to file jointly with my wife. That's great. However, there are some nuances or extra planning, shall we say, for LGBTQ couples. Specifically around navigating family and asset protection, and of course, your kids. Or if you think about it too, if you have intricate family dynamics where you might not be accepted given your lifestyle, right? So some of those things can pose some additional risk to an estate plan. The reality is that your estate plan, which outlines your decisions on where you want your assets to go when you die, who makes financial decisions for you or medical decisions for you when you cannot, and who takes care of your kids when you're no longer here. They're vulnerable to unsupportive family members. How? We've seen it time and time again. They can contest your will if they don't recognize your relationship. You open yourself to, custody battles when the non-biological parent outlives the biological parent, or they become incapacitated. This is also important if you go through a divorce, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And lastly, family can impede on your spouse's ability to make those medical and financial decisions for your partner when needed. So these need to be carefully considered, and your estate plan can really help outline what your wishes are to avoid some of these common pitfalls. Imagine just being with a partner, say, for 20 years and not being able to make those decisions for them after a catastrophic accident, or handle the finances when they're unable to. Or even imagine the courts deciding where your money goes if the both of you die, or what happens to your kids if the biological parent passes. This is the real reality for a lot of people. So the estate plan is quite critical. So what do you need? One, you need a will. A will that outlines your wishes in the event of death, right? So where are your assets going to go? Who's going to be the guardian for your children? Who will manage your money? You want to make sure that it includes language that aligns with current laws. You even want it to include and outline your final arrangements at death. So you get to dictate through your will, the details of what you want to happen and what your wishes are, so that your family can't impede on that and the courts don't have to decide for you. The second thing you need is a financial power of attorney. And this is where you can assign the person you want to make financial decisions or manage your finances in the event you become incapacitated. A healthcare power of attorney, or otherwise known as a healthcare proxy. That's where you choose somebody to make medical decisions for you when you cannot. This is really, really important too for unmarried couples. It's not just for married couples. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in the healthcare proxy as well, you also determine what happens with your remains, right? Where do you want to be buried? Something that's also often overlooked in estate plans is the HIPAA privacy authorization form. This is very critical for LGBTQ couples. This particular form allows doctors or other healthcare professionals to disclose pertinent health information and records to your designated healthcare power of attorney. So you want to be able to have the doctors be able to speak to your partner, your wife, your husband about your situation. And then a healthcare directive. So that also designates the type of care you want to receive at the end of life. So those are some of the important documents that you want to incorporate into your estate plan. And again, you want to work with an advisor that can help navigate the specific language and sort of things that you might want to include within those documents.
Every adult needs to have their estate plan in place, married or single. So that was a really, really important point you made.
Let me drive that home. Estate plan. So estate documents are very incredibly critical if you're not married or not a registered domestic partner. If you're not married and you're not a registered domestic partner, you're not on that higher hierarchy of being appointed by the court, no matter how long you've been together. Okay, so what does that mean? The courts have a hierarchy established by state law that says who can step in to manage your finances in the event you cannot, or make medical decisions for you. If you're married, it's your spouse. After that, it's not your partner of 20 years, it's your parents, it's your kids, it's your sister. So that's why it's even that much more important if you're unmarried. Let me hop back a little bit. I do want to talk about children. I talked a little bit about custody battles. And when it comes to, in order to prevent a custody battle, the non-biological parent in the relationship really should strongly suggest you look to formally adopt that child. Adoption establishes a legal relationship to avoid having that battle for custody if anything happens to the biological parent. We've seen this time and time again. I think, Barbara, you and I were just talking about a situation that happened in Oklahoma recently, where a lesbian couple is going through divorce. And the biological parent petitioned to remove the non-biological mom from the birth certificate. And guess what? The judge ruled that the non-biological mom, quote, failed to pursue a legal remedy to establish parental rights, adoption. So even though she was there for the pregnancy via artificial insemination, she was there for the birth, cut the umbilical cord, has raised the child so far and listed on the birth certificate, she's out of luck. Did not go through the adoption process. So that's why it's incredibly important to work with an advisor who really truly understands the intricacies that you can face and the challenges you can face in the future, right? We don't want to think about just now, we need to think ahead.
Barbara, a question for you as we wrap up today. You've been in business for 30 years. How have you seen the culture, the office environment, the business environment change for the LGBTQ community during the course of your career? And what advice would you have for professionals today?
So yes, there has been a lot of change over the last almost 30 years that I've been working in financial services. I think that it is really up to folks who are, diverse, for example, whether it's their background, their race, their color, what have you, LGBTQ. I think you have to communicate. You have to be open. Not everyone is entirely comfortable with talking about it, but I do think that there were some pioneers throughout the course of the last 3 decades, certainly before then. It's important to just keep the conversation going. We are always looking to learn from others, learn about their experiences and try to shape the future. I have had the good fortune of not really experiencing any sort of ill will or discrimination over the course of my career that I'm aware of. And I think it's because I was just always myself. I am who I am. I didn't stir the pot too much, but I was definitely not shy about who I was, who my family is, and anything like that. And quite proudly, I'm happy to say that I enjoy serving the LGBTQ community. It is, we're at a sort of a point in time, Lisa Brown, where, there are so many financial advisors across the country. Sadly, I think only about 17 or 18% are women. And so we need to sort of help each other increase that population. And certainly when you think about the average investor, they're looking to work with an advisor who knows and can appreciate the challenges that they go through. And so, Lisa, Niera, and I are happy to accommodate them. But again, we're in a world where experience is key. And those experiences that we can bring to clients and helping them shape their own plans and future is really helpful. But I think we've got a lot of wood to chop. And again, having conversations like these, I think, are really helpful and eye-opening to people.
Well, Lisa and Barbara, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today, sharing your wisdom, your advice, your personal stories, and your guidance in honor of Pride Month. Lisa and Barbara both offer complimentary financial consultations for new clients, so reach out to them. They can be reached at 973-425-8420.